It started as a whisper among a handful of scientists working the night shift at an old monitoring station. The place was quiet, the kind of silence that comes when most of the world has gone to sleep. Then, at exactly 2:37 in the morning, one of the machines began to hum. A faint signal pulsed through the noise, soft, broken, almost like a heartbeat coming from the edge of space. At first, no one cared much. Space is full of random sounds and static, and the system often picked up nonsense signals. But this one was different. It repeated every 22 seconds, and every time it played, a strange pattern followed, like a voice trying to push through the darkness. The scientists tried to decode it for hours. When the first few symbols appeared on their screens, one of them leaned closer and whispered, "It's not noise." The words that followed changed everything. After 2 long nights of analysis, the message became clear enough to read. It was short, desperate, and terrifyingly human in tone. It said, "We are under attack. Please send warriors." At first, nobody believed it. Governments thought it was a prank, maybe an old satellite glitching, or a secret transmission from some military test. But the coordinates in the message pointed to a system no one had ever reached. The signal wasn't from Earth. It came from beyond the farthest edge of the mapped universe, a place where human technology had never touched. And the message wasn't in any known Earth language, but it had structure, rhythm, and emotion. Someone or something was begging for help. Within a week, the world's major powers had copies of the transmission. The media never found out about it, but behind closed doors, the message spread like wildfire. For the first time in decades, the leaders of rival nations sat together in the same room, not to discuss war or peace treaties, but to answer a question no one had ever asked before. Should Earth respond? Many said no. We can't even handle our own problems, one general argued. Why would we fight someone else's war? Others saw something deeper, an opportunity, maybe even destiny. If they're asking for help, said one of the advisors, then somewhere out there we're not alone. After weeks of debate, the world decided to respond not with speeches or diplomacy, but with what Earth had always relied on in times of danger, its warriors. But these wouldn't be soldiers chosen from one flag or one army. This would be something new, something secret. A quiet agreement was signed among a handful of powerful nations, forming a project that didn't officially exist. Its name was simple, Project Gatekeeper. It would bring together the best of Earth's fighters, not the kind shown on posters or celebrated in the news, but the kind who operated in shadows, who had seen too much and survived everything. Men and women shaped by conflict, not glory. They weren't being chosen to represent humanity. They were being chosen because they understood war better than anyone else alive. Across the world, the selection began quietly. Old files were reopened, military records reviewed, and names disappeared from lists overnight. Some were retired soldiers living quietly in small towns. Some were part of elite units that didn't officially exist. And some were civilians who had skills the world didn't even have a name for. None of them knew why they were being called. All they received was a single message. You have been selected for a mission of global importance. Report immediately. When they arrived at the isolated facility, deep in the mountains, they were stripped of everything that made them who they were. Uniforms, ranks, even names. They became part of something nameless and silent. The air inside the base felt heavy, filled with questions no one dared to ask. What kind of mission needed this much secrecy? Why were people from rival countries suddenly training side by side? And why were scientists from the space agency walking among generals and field commanders? Days turned into weeks as they trained for conditions no one had ever experienced. Zero-gravity combat, strange atmospheric simulations, new weapon systems that didn't resemble anything on Earth. The soldiers were told little, only that the operation was off-world and that failure was not an option. Some joked that they were going to the moon. Others laughed nervously and said maybe it was Mars. But deep down, everyone knew it was something much bigger. Something the human mind wasn't yet ready to understand. Outside the walls of that base, life went on as usual. The public knew nothing. The news focused on politics, celebrities, and sports. No one suspected that hidden under the calm surface of everyday life, Earth was preparing for its first war beyond the stars. Back in the command room, the scientists kept monitoring the original signal. It hadn't stopped. It kept repeating, weaker each time like a dying breath. Along with the words came images, Blurry shapes, flashes of cities burning, and creatures that didn't look human. The transmission was so broken that no one could see clearly, but one thing stood out: the faces of beings that looked frightened, exhausted, desperate. Whoever they were being hunted by something far worse. The soldiers were finally briefed about the truth. The message was real, and it wasn't a trap. It came from a planet light years away, inhabited by a species that had no means of defense. They had been attacked by another civilization, something powerful, ruthless, and merciless. They didn't ask for technology or food. They asked for warriors. They wanted Earth's strength, Earth's fighters, Earth's ability to survive anything. When the commander finished explaining, the room fell silent. For a long moment, no one said a word. Then one of the older soldiers spoke up quietly. "You're saying they want help," he said. "What kind of help?" The commander's voice was cold, almost emotionless. "The kind only humans can give. They asked for warriors. We're sending executioners." That sentence hung in the air like smoke. Everyone understood what it meant. This mission wasn't about peacekeeping or defense. It was about doing what humans had done for centuries, ending a war by becoming the storm that no enemy could survive. Over the next months, the world's best engineers worked day and night to build the ships that would carry them. The technology was rushed, combining existing space programs with alien data decoded from the signal itself. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. The soldiers were told that once they left, they might never come back. Earth couldn't send reinforcements, and communication would be almost impossible. Still, no one backed out. They didn't need reasons. They needed purpose. As departure day approached, the team received their final orders. They were no longer individuals representing countries or causes. They were humanity's answer to the first call from the stars. A call for help that demanded more than compassion. It demanded power. The night before launch, some of them sat together on the observation deck, staring at the dark sky. It looked peaceful, calm, almost innocent. One of them spoke quietly. "It's strange. We've spent our whole lives fighting each other. Now we're supposed to fight for them." Another replied, "Maybe that's all humans are good at." There was no laughter, no pride, just silence. The kind of silence that comes before a storm. In the early morning, the ship stood ready. No flags, no symbols, just sleek black hulls and quiet engines humming like a heartbeat. The soldiers boarded in groups, carrying only their weapons and a single photo or memory from home. As the countdown began, the base shook. The world outside would never know that in that moment, humanity crossed the line between myth and reality. When the engines roared and the ships lifted through the clouds, the entire sky glowed for a brief second, then went dark again. To everyone else on Earth, it was just thunder on a clear morning. But somewhere far above, the soldiers looked back one last time through the viewing ports. The planet below looked small, blue, and fragile. One of them whispered, "They asked for warriors." Another answered, almost to himself, "They have no idea what they're getting." And just like that, the fleet vanished into the blackness, leaving behind no trace, only the silent promise that when Earth answers a call for help, it never sends angels. It sends survivors. It sends those who know how to fight, how to win, and how to end what others can't. The message from the stars had reached its answer. Earth had replied, not with words but with action. And out there, somewhere in the endless dark, the galaxy was about to learn a truth it would never forget. When you call Earth for help, be ready for what answers. After the ships left Earth's skies, the project that created them continued in silence. Not many people knew that a second phase had begun long before the first one even launched. The ones who left weren't the only part of Project Gatekeeper. There was another group, people being prepared for something even more difficult. They were the replacements, the reserves, the second wave that might be needed if the first never returned. These weren't soldiers in the traditional sense. Many of them didn't wear uniforms. They came from places that didn't exist on any map. Some were former soldiers who had disappeared years ago. Others were experts in survival, tracking, tactics, or languages. Each had been through something that broke them once, but somehow they kept standing. That was exactly what the program wanted. They weren't looking for perfect people. They were looking for the kind who refused to die. The selection began quietly, spread across countries under different names. Some were told it was a rescue mission. Others were told nothing at all. They were picked up in unmarked vehicles taken to isolated testing centers in deserts, mountains, or abandoned islands. Once inside, there was no escape. They went through medical checks, mental evaluations, and strange simulations that none of them understood. Every day, the same question was repeated by the trainers. What are you willing to do for Earth? Most said what they thought was expected. Patriotic words, short speeches about duty and loyalty. But that wasn't what the evaluators wanted. The few who passed said something else entirely. One said, "I'll do what others can't." Another said, "I don't fight for flags. I fight for the ones who can't." Those were the kinds of answers that made the trainers quietly mark their files and move on. Weeks passed before the chosen few were told anything real. They were called into a room that looked like an underground bunker. There were no windows, no clocks, no sense of time. At the center of the room stood a projection, a map of stars none of them recognized. The instructor, a calm man with tired eyes, began to speak. "You've all been chosen because you understand what survival means," he said. "You're not heroes. You're not saints. You are the kind of people the world hides when it wants to forget what it takes to stay alive. The mission you're training for isn't on Earth. It's not even in this solar system." At first they thought he was joking, but then the projection changed, showing the planet that had sent the original message. It was a world covered in forests and glowing oceans, beautiful and strange. The air in the room grew heavier as he explained the rest. "This planet called for help. The people there can't fight. They asked for warriors. We're sending you." For a few seconds, no one spoke. The silence wasn't fear, it was confusion. Someone finally asked, "You mean aliens? Real ones?" The instructor nodded slightly. "Yes, real as you and me. But they aren't what you imagine. They're fragile. They're peaceful. They don't understand war." Then his tone changed. "That's why we're sending you. Not to protect them, but to end what's threatening them." The room stayed quiet after that. Each person began to understand what kind of mission this really was. It wasn't a peacekeeping mission. It wasn't about saving lives. It was about ending a war so fast, so brutally, that no one would ever think of starting it again. Training became harder after that day. The recruits stopped asking questions. They just moved, fought, and learned. They practiced in environments that changed constantly. Frozen wastelands one day, toxic jungles the next. The trainers wanted them ready for anything. They were taught how to fight in zero gravity, how to operate new weapons that didn't fire bullets but beams of pure light, and how to breathe in air that wasn't made for humans. Every part of their body and mind was being rebuilt for something no one had ever done before. But even with all the technology, the most important lessons were about human nature. "Machines can break," one instructor said. "Your mind can't." So they were trained to adapt, to think without orders, to trust their instincts even when everything around them made no sense. In the evenings, when the drills ended, they would sit together in silence. No laughter, no conversations about home, just the quiet understanding that they might never see Earth again. Every few weeks, they were brought into a dark theater to watch recordings from the first mission. The footage was silent, grainy, and sometimes incomplete. They saw flashes of battles, landscapes burning in blue fire and shapes moving too fast to identify. Then they saw the soldiers from Earth, men and women fighting like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. The aliens who had begged for help stood back, watching in shock as humans tore through the enemy like predators from another world. One clip showed an alien child looking up at a soldier in full armor, too afraid to speak. The soldier just stood there, breathing heavily, weapon still smoking. There was no victory celebration, no smiles, only exhaustion. That was the moment everyone in the room understood why the program called them executioners. They weren't going to be saviors. They were going to be the thing the galaxy feared most, the living reminder of what Earth was capable of. Still, no one refused. If anything, the training center felt heavier with determination. Every person there had come from a life of pain, loss, war, or regret. Now for the first time they had a purpose that made sense to them. They weren't fighting for medals or fame. They were fighting because someone, somewhere, believed Earth was strong enough to save them. One night, during a rare break, a few of them sat near the edge of the training grounds, looking at the artificial sky projected on the dome above them. One of them said softly, "Do you think they even know what they asked for?" Another replied, "No, but they'll find out soon." The third one simply said, "Maybe this is what we were made for." Meanwhile, in secret labs deep beneath the surface, scientists worked to improve the transport technology. They used fragments of data from the first alien signal to build faster drives, new communication systems, and weapons that could survive environments no human had ever seen. Every invention came with a cost. Testing accidents, failed trials, lives lost quietly and unrecorded. The outside world had no clue that some of Earth's brightest minds were dying in the name of a mission they couldn't even speak about. Then, one evening, the signal from the alien world came again. It was weaker now, almost unreadable, but one part was clear. They are coming again. Please hurry. The urgency sent a chill through the command center. If the first mission had succeeded, then who was attacking again? Or had something gone wrong? The commander decided it was time. The second wave would be prepared for launch within months. This time, there would be no delay, no hesitation. Earth had already shown the galaxy what its warriors could do. Now it would show them what its executioners were truly capable of. Before deployment, each member of the unit was given one final moment of choice. A simple question: do you accept? Some thought of their family, some thought of the Earth they might never see again. But in the end, every single one said yes. Not because they were fearless, but because fear was something they had already made peace with long ago. The night before the launch, they were taken to an observation platform where the ship stood waiting. The engines were silent, glowing faintly under the lights. The sky above was clear, filled with stars that looked close enough to touch. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the commander said quietly, "When they asked for warriors, they didn't know what Earth really was. You will show them. Not who we pretend to be, but who we are when we're pushed." The soldiers stood there, their faces calm, eyes fixed on the horizon. They weren't thinking about glory or survival. They were thinking about the message that started it all. Someone out there had cried for help, and Earth had answered. The universe might never understand humanity, but after what was about to happen, it would never forget it. When dawn came, the engines came alive again, lighting up the ground like a second sun. The air trembled, the earth shook, and one by one, the ships lifted off, disappearing into the sky, silent and determined. Somewhere far above, the stars waited for them, and somewhere beyond those stars, the ones who had begged for warriors had no idea that what was coming wasn't an army of heroes. It was something far more dangerous. They had called for help, and Earth had sent its answer. Not warriors, executioners. When the engines came to life, the sky above Earth turned white for a moment. Every window in the surrounding mountains shook, and a deep rumble rolled through the valley like thunder. To the rest of the world, it was just another classified experiment that no one would ever hear about. But to those on board, it was the beginning of a journey no human had ever taken before. Inside the ship, everything trembled. The seats were built for war, not comfort. Straps tightened across their chests as the ship cut through the atmosphere. The sound was deafening, metal groaning against gravity, and then suddenly silence. The soldiers looked at each other. The vibration stopped. For the first time in human history, they were no longer under the pull of Earth. They were weightless, floating, untethered. The planet they called home was now nothing more than a small blue sphere shrinking behind them. Some turned to look, quietly holding their breath. Others refused to. Looking back meant thinking about what they had left: families, homes, unfinished lives. None of them had been promised a return. The commander's voice came through the comms, steady and calm. "Mission Phase 2 initiated. Course locked. Estimated travel time. Classified." No one asked how long it would take. Time had already lost meaning. For days, maybe weeks, they traveled in the dark. The ship didn't make sound, and the windows showed nothing but endless stars. Inside, routines became their way of staying sane. Training continued even in zero gravity. They practiced aiming, movement, communication, and survival drills. Every hour was planned. The human body wasn't built for this kind of stillness, so they kept busy. But at night, when the lights dimmed and the hum of the engines was the only thing left, thoughts began to surface. Some whispered to themselves. Others just stared out into the void. One of the older soldiers said quietly, "Out here you realize how small Earth really is." Another replied, "Maybe small, but dangerous." They both laughed softly, the kind of laugh that hides too much pain. The ship's artificial day and night cycles kept them grounded. Meals came in silver packets, tasteless but efficient. They didn't speak much while eating. The silence had become a companion now. Every once in a while, someone would ask about the first mission, those who had gone before. No one had answers. The records were locked. All they knew was that the first team had succeeded, at a cost no one wanted to talk about. Then came the strange days. The sensors began to pick up things, flashes of light outside the ship, shapes moving against the backdrop of stars. The scientists on board said it was just debris or natural energy fields, but everyone felt something different. It was as if they weren't alone anymore. The feeling stayed, growing stronger as the ship entered uncharted regions of space. One night the lights flickered. The systems glitched for only a second, but it was enough to make everyone look up. A deep vibration ran through the floor, followed by a low hum that wasn't from the engines. It felt alive, almost like a heartbeat. Then, as quickly as it started, it stopped. The commander ordered a systems check. Nothing was found. Just a pulse from the nearby nebula, the technician said, though his voice trembled. After that, the soldiers stopped sleeping peacefully. Some said they could hear whispers when the lights went out. Others dreamed of voices calling from the dark. The human mind wasn't made to handle the silence of space. It bends under it. Yet they endured because they had to. Days later, the ship finally began to shake again. The view outside changed. The stars stretched into streaks of light as the engines fired at full capacity. The navigator announced, "Approaching destination coordinates." The soldiers strapped in, hearts racing. The blackness ahead began to ripple like water, and then with a sudden burst of light they were through. The planet filled the window. It was nothing like Earth. Its surface was covered in green mist, its oceans glowed faintly blue, and enormous cloud rings spun slowly around its poles. From orbit it looked peaceful, almost dreamlike, but the readings told another story. Traces of destruction, energy burns, and massive heat signatures scattered across continents. The soldiers watched in silence. Somewhere down there, someone had called for them. Somewhere down there, the first team had fought, and maybe died. "Prepare for descent," came the order. The air inside the ship grew tense. Weapons were checked, armor sealed, communications synced. The engines flared as the ship began its descent into the planet's atmosphere. The sky outside turned from black to burning red, then to soft green light. When the landing gear hit the ground, dust rose like fog. The hatch opened slowly, releasing a wave of humid air that smelled strange, sweet but heavy. They stepped out in formation, scanning everything. The terrain was alien yet oddly familiar. Trees taller than buildings reached toward the clouds, and the ground shimmered with patches of glowing moss. In the distance, something moved. Small figures, fragile, afraid. They were the ones who had sent the signal. Their bodies were thin, pale, with wide eyes that reflected light like mirrors. They looked both beautiful and fragile, like something made of glass. When they saw the humans, they froze. Some fell to their knees, others simply stared in silence. The language barrier didn't matter. Fear is universal. The translator devices began to work, catching fragments of speech. "You came," you answered. "The others are gone." Their voices were soft, shaking with both hope and horror. The commander stepped forward. "We received your call," he said slowly. His words translated into sound waves that echoed in their language. "We're here to help." But even as he said it, the humans could see the truth in their eyes. These people didn't understand what kind of help they had invited. To them, humans were giants, machines of war wrapped in armor, faces hidden behind black glass. They led the soldiers through their settlement, if it could be called that. It was quiet, broken, full of ruins. The air smelled of ash and something chemical. Homes were burned, machines lay twisted on the ground, and the faces of the survivors carried the look of people who had seen things no one should ever see. At the edge of the village there was a wall, a memorial of sorts. Symbols were carved into it, glowing faintly. One of the locals touched it and whispered something the translators barely caught. "They took the sky from us." That night, as the soldiers set up camp, the commander studied the reports. The enemy that had attacked this world was still out there. The data showed that their weapons were beyond anything humanity had ever built. But they lacked one thing Earth had mastered: the will to fight until the very end. When the night came, strange sounds echoed through the forest, deep calls, heavy movement, and distant flashes of blue fire. The locals whispered one word again and again: Hunters. Before dawn, the humans saw them. Tall, dark creatures with skin like armor and eyes that glowed faint red. They moved with silent precision, their weapons sharp and clean. When they spotted the human outpost, they didn't hesitate. They attacked. The first shots lit up the jungle. Blue fire met human steel. The creatures were fast, but the soldiers were faster. Every movement was calculated, every shot measured. They fought not like defenders, but like predators unleashed. Within minutes, the attackers were gone. Not one was left standing. The ground was silent again except for the faint hum of cooling weapons. The locals stared in shock. They had expected bravery, but what they witnessed was something else entirely. There was no hesitation, no mercy, no emotion. When the battle ended, the commander turned toward the frightened survivors and said quietly, "It's done," but they didn't cheer. They didn't move. They simply stared, realizing that the creatures who had come to save them were not saviors. They were destroyers wearing human skin. The soldiers looked around at the carnage. The smell of burnt air filled their lungs. They had won the fight, but in that moment even victory felt heavy. The mission had just begun, but already the locals whispered a phrase that would spread across their world in fear. Earth did not send warriors. They sent executioners. The words followed them long after the fires died down, and as the humans cleaned their weapons under the pale alien moon, not one of them spoke, because deep down they knew the truth. This was only the beginning. The war that waited beyond the forests was far greater than any of them had been told. They had answered the call for help. But what they were about to face would change the meaning of humanity forever. The morning after the battle was silent. The forest that once glowed in soft green light now smelled of smoke and metal. The mist hung low, hiding the scars left behind by the night fight. The locals stayed hidden in their shelters, too afraid to step outside. The humans, meanwhile, moved through the wreckage like ghosts, calm, precise, and quiet. They didn't speak much. They didn't celebrate victory. For them, a fight was never something to cheer about. It was simply another day of survival. The commander stood at the edge of the camp watching the horizon. The forest stretched endlessly, the trees swaying gently as if pretending nothing had happened. The calm was a lie, and he knew it. The enemy wasn't gone. They were waiting, watching, learning. The soldiers began to collect the strange bodies of the attackers. Their armor was fused into their skin. Their weapons grew out of their arms like living machines. The scientists who came with the team tried to study them, but the commander stopped them after a few hours. "They're not here to teach us," he said quietly. "They're here to kill." By evening, the locals finally came out. Their leader, if that's what he was, approached carefully. He looked at the humans as if they were both saviors and monsters. His voice trembled when he spoke through the translator. "You destroyed them in minutes," he said. "We have fought them for years." The commander didn't respond right away. Finally, he said, "We've been fighting our whole lives." That night, the humans built stronger defenses around the village. They set up motion sensors, shield barriers, and silent drones that hovered in the dark like unseen guards. The locals watched with wide eyes, whispering among themselves. They had expected warriors who would fight alongside them, but what they saw were soldiers who didn't need anyone else. They worked like a single machine, their movements smooth, practiced, and cold. There was something almost unnatural about how calm they were. No shouting, no anger, just silent purpose. When darkness came again, the jungle came alive with distant sounds, metal scraping, low growls, the heavy rhythm of movement. The creatures were regrouping. The humans prepared without panic. Every weapon was checked, every soldier took position. The commander gave one order: hold the line. No one crosses. The attack came fast and violent. Hundreds of the enemy poured out of the forest like a living tide. Their weapons fired beams that tore through the air, lighting up the night sky. The humans responded instantly. Their shots were clean, precise, merciless. The ground shook under the force of explosions. But the soldiers never broke formation. They fought as if the noise didn't exist. To the locals watching from behind the barriers, it looked less like a battle and more like execution. When it was over, the forest was on fire. The air shimmered with heat. Dozens of the attackers lay motionless, their armor melted into the earth. The humans moved through the smoke, checking for survivors of their own, not the enemy. None of them spoke. The only sound was the faint crackling of burning trees. One of the younger locals, trembling, walked up to the commander. "You killed them all," he whispered. "Every single one." The commander's visor hid his face as he answered, "They would have done the same." The local looked at the ground. "No," he said softly. "They wouldn't have." Those words stayed with the humans long after the fires burned out. The next few days passed in uneasy silence. The locals repaired what they could, trying to rebuild what little was left of their world. The humans began pushing farther into the jungle, tracking where the enemy came from. Each step deeper revealed more horror. Villages wiped out, entire valleys turned into craters, forests turned to glass by energy blasts. The commander realized that the war here wasn't new. It had been burning for decades, maybe centuries. The deeper they went, the stranger the planet became. The air grew thick with a faint blue fog that clung to their armor. The ground trembled sometimes, as if something massive was moving far below. One of the soldiers whispered over the comms, "Feels like the planet's alive." No one replied, but everyone felt it too. On the fourth day of their advance, they found something that changed everything. A large structure stood hidden beneath the jungle, a tower of black stone and metal pulsing faintly with light. The readings from the scanners showed impossible energy levels. This was no simple base. It was something ancient, something built long before either side of the war had existed. Inside, the walls were covered in symbols that none of their translators could read. In the center of the chamber, they found what looked like a device, still active, projecting faint holograms into the air. The images showed the same creatures that attacked them, but smaller, weaker, and unarmed. They looked almost peaceful. The soldiers exchanged glances. Whatever had turned them into monsters had started here. The commander sent a message back to orbit, but communication was weak. The signal kept cutting off. The reply came hours later. "Proceed with caution. Mission priority. Contain the threat. No extraction until command confirms full control." That meant they were on their own. That night, as the soldiers rested around their portable heaters, one of them finally spoke up. "Do you ever think maybe we're the bad ones?" he asked quietly. No one answered. But the silence was heavy. Deep down, each of them had thought it already. They came to help, but every time they fought, the ones they protected looked at them with fear instead of gratitude. The next morning, the locals refused to get near the humans. They whispered a word in their own tongue, one that the translators struggled to explain. It meant something between Deathbringer and Protector. It wasn't a compliment, but it wasn't an insult either. It was simply what the humans had become. A storm hit later that day. Rain mixed with glowing dust that made the sky look like it was bleeding light. Visibility dropped to nothing. The humans used it as cover, moving toward the next enemy location marked on their scanners. When they arrived, the storm cleared, revealing a massive fortress carved into a mountain. This was where the enemy had come from. The battle that followed would decide the planet's future. The assault started before dawn. The humans moved in silently, taking positions across the cliffs. The enemy's defenses lit up immediately, firing volleys of energy blasts. The ground shook under the impact. The soldiers advanced anyway. They didn't wait for orders, they didn't need to. Their training, their instincts, their years of surviving Earth's own wars had made them into something beyond soldiers. They were predators unleashed on a new hunting ground. The fighting lasted for hours. Every explosion echoed through the valleys, and the sky turned red from the fires. The locals watched from miles away, praying to whatever gods they still believed in. By the time the sun rose, the fortress was gone. The mountain itself had collapsed. When the humans returned, their armor was covered in dust and ash. None of them spoke of what happened inside. The locals tried to thank them, but their voices shook with fear. One of them whispered, "You fight like the creatures you destroy." The commander only said, "That's why we win." That night, the locals held a quiet gathering. They lit small orbs of light and set them into the air, floating up into the dark sky. It was their way of honoring the dead. They included the humans too, though the humans didn't understand why. As the glowing lights drifted upward, one soldier watched them and said softly, "They think we're saving them, but I think we're showing them what humans really are." The next day, scouts reported something new, a signal, not from the enemy, but from another source on the far side of the planet. It was weak but clear, a human distress call. The first team, they were still out there. For a long moment, no one said a word. The silence broke when the commander finally spoke. "Pack up. We move at dawn." The soldiers prepared once again, but something had changed. The locals stood back as they passed, bowing their heads but not in respect, in fear. The humans didn't look back. They had come to answer a cry for help, but now they were chasing one of their own. Above them, the alien sun began to rise, casting long shadows across the burned ground. The war was far from over. The planet might have been saved for the moment, but the legend of the humans, the Deathworlders, the executioners, had already begun to spread across the stars. Somewhere, among the whispers of the frightened survivors, a new phrase was born. When the sky burns green, it means Earth has come, and no one, not even the humans themselves, could decide if that was a warning or a promise. The march toward the source of the distress signal began at dawn. The humans moved quietly, their footsteps steady on the soft blue soil. The jungle had grown silent again, as if the planet itself was holding its breath. Even the locals, who had once followed at a distance, chose not to come this time. They stood at the edge of their rebuilt homes and simply watched the humans fade into the mist. Some bowed their heads. Others turned away. None dared to speak. The path ahead was rough. The soldiers moved through deep valleys, past rivers that glowed faintly under the strange sun. Every few hours, their sensors picked up brief flashes of movement. Something fast, always just beyond sight. The commander gave one order again and again: keep moving. No one questioned it. By nightfall, they reached the ridge overlooking a vast crater. Inside it stood the ruins of what seemed to be another alien city, now reduced to broken towers and blackened ground. In the center of it all was the faint signal they had been tracking. The first team was down there, or what was left of them. The commander looked through his visor. The signal was faint but steady. Someone was alive. The team descended into the crater in silence, the air thick with dust and static. The remains of alien machines lay scattered everywhere. Their surfaces melted and twisted. Whatever had happened here had been brutal. They found the first signs of life near a collapsed structure, a half-buried ship, its hull cracked open. Inside, they discovered 3 humans. One was badly wounded, another barely conscious, and the third stared blankly into the distance, whispering the same words again and again. It wasn't supposed to be like this. The medics rushed to help, injecting stabilizers and wrapping wounds. The commander knelt beside the survivor who could still speak. His voice was weak but clear. "They tried to talk to us," he said. "We thought they were the enemy. But they weren't." The commander frowned. "Who were you talking about?" "The creatures," the man said, coughing. "They changed. But not by choice. Something's controlling them. The tower, it's not a weapon. It's a prison. And we broke it." The words sank in slowly. The commander felt a cold wave run down his spine. If what the man said was true, then the battle they fought, the slaughter in the jungle, wasn't a victory. It was a massacre of victims who never had a chance to be free. Before they could ask more, the ground beneath them began to shake. The scanners screamed warnings. The commander shouted, "Move!" The earth split open. A surge of energy burst upward, tearing through the ruins. The team scrambled for cover as blinding light filled the crater. From the fissure rose something massive, a living machine of metal and flesh towering high above the ruins. It wasn't like the creatures they had fought before. This one was different, older, smarter. It moved with purpose, not rage. The commander raised his weapon, but deep inside he knew this fight was beyond any weapon. The creature spoke, not in words, but in a vibration that rattled the air. Their translator struggled, then finally broke through the noise. "You freed us," it said, its voice echoing like thunder. "But freedom has a price." The soldiers froze. The commander lowered his weapon slowly. "What are you?" he asked. The creature's voice filled their helmets. "We were guardians once, protectors of this world, until those who feared us turned our power into chains. You came and shattered those chains. Now we remember what we were." The air shimmered with energy. The ground pulsed like a heartbeat. The soldiers could feel it through their boots, something ancient and angry waking up beneath them. The commander knew they couldn't fight this. "Evacuate," he ordered. "Now!" They carried the wounded and raced up the slope. Behind them, the ruins began to collapse as the creature rose higher, its body glowing with lines of molten light. It didn't attack, but it didn't stop either. It simply turned toward the horizon and started walking. Every step it took shook the ground for miles. When they reached the top of the ridge, the team looked back. The once dead land now blazed with strange energy. The creature moved toward the jungle, the same jungle where the locals lived. The commander opened a channel to the ship in orbit. "Command, this is ground team. We have a situation." "Repeat, a world-scale entity has been awakened." Static answered first. Then a calm voice from orbit replied. "Understood. Containment protocol is authorized." The commander froze. He knew what that meant. Containment was another word for destruction. Hours later, they reached their base camp near the edge of the forest. The locals were waiting. Their faces were pale, their eyes full of fear. They had seen the glowing figure moving through the night. "What have you done?" their leader asked. "You woke the old one." The commander didn't answer. He didn't have one. That night the sky changed color. The stars disappeared behind rolling waves of light. The ground trembled as the creature moved across the land. The locals began to pray, chanting softly in their own language. The humans, meanwhile, prepared airstrikes and ground artillery. The commander stood apart from his team, staring at the horizon. He remembered the words of the dying man from the first team. It wasn't supposed to be like this. He spoke quietly to himself. Maybe it never was. As dawn approached, the creature reached the edge of the forest. It stopped, towering above the trees. Then, without warning, beams of light shot into the sky from its body. Signals, maybe, or something worse. The human scanners went wild. Whatever it was doing, it was powerful enough to shake the planet's magnetic field. Command's voice came through again, sharp and final. "Authorization confirmed. Orbital strike in 2 minutes." The commander's heart sank. "There are civilians down there," he said. "Collateral damage acceptable," the voice replied. "Mission priority, prevent planetary collapse." The commander turned off his comms. Around him, his soldiers stood waiting for orders. Some looked afraid. Others looked tired. He could see the question in their eyes. What now? He took a deep breath. "We're not executioners today," he said quietly. "We're done killing for someone else's mistake." The soldiers stared at him. Then one by one they nodded. They began moving civilians toward the far side of the valley, herding them into old tunnels beneath the hills. Above them, the sky burned brighter. The commander knew they couldn't stop the strike, but maybe, just maybe, they could save a few lives before it hit. 2 minutes felt like 2 hours. The air turned electric. The first flash came from above, white, silent, and blinding. The ground exploded moments later. The sound hit like a hurricane. Everything shook. Fire swept across the jungle. When it was over, nothing moved. Smoke covered the sky. The once green forest was gone. Hours passed before the noise faded. Slowly, the humans and the survivors crawled out of the tunnels. The world around them had changed again. Burned, broken, silent. But against all odds, the massive creature still stood in the distance. Its body was cracked and fading, but it was still alive. It turned its head toward the humans. The commander stepped forward. He didn't raise his weapon. The creature's voice echoed faintly like the last breath of a dying god. "You fight to save what you destroy." And then it collapsed, sinking into the earth, vanishing beneath the ground. The team stood in silence. The commander looked around. The jungle, the locals, the blackened horizon. For the first time, he didn't know if they had won or lost. That night, as the survivors gathered near the ruins, the locals brought small lanterns again. They lit them and placed them on the ground. Each light represented someone lost. There were hundreds of them. A child came forward and handed one to the commander. "For you," she said softly. He stared at it for a long time, then set it gently among the others. The lights flickered in the cold wind, reflecting off the soldiers' helmets. They had come to save a world, and in doing so, they had almost destroyed it. The commander looked up at the dark sky. Somewhere above, Earth was waiting, proud of its soldiers. But down here, surrounded by smoke and ashes, he couldn't feel proud. He felt only the weight of what they had done. He whispered to himself, "They asked Earth for warriors. We sent executioners." The next morning, the humans began preparing to leave. The locals didn't stop them. They just watched quietly as the strange visitors packed their weapons and machines. When the ships finally lifted off, the ground shook again. But this time, no one was afraid. They were just pretty. As the ships disappeared into the clouds, one of the locals looked up and said softly, "Maybe they'll remember us. Or maybe they'll forget. But we will never forget them." And far above the ruined world, the human fleet turned toward home, carrying stories that no one would ever fully understand. They had come as saviors. They were leaving as ghosts. The journey back to Earth was quiet. The soldiers moved through the void of space with the weight of the world, or rather the weight of countless worlds, pressing down on them. The stars outside the ship were cold and distant, indifferent to the battles fought below. Inside, the silence was heavy, each person lost in memories too sharp to speak aloud. Some looked at the screens showing the planet they had just left, now a blackened shadow of its former self. Smoke still rose in faint columns, forests were gone, and the ruins of cities stretched like open wounds across the land. The locals had survived, yes, but at what cost? Families had been lost, generations shattered. Even the humans who had fought here felt hollow. Every strike, every shot had been precise, but precision didn't heal the scars left behind. The commander stood at the front, hands clasped behind his back, staring out into the stars. He remembered the first message that started it all. Please send warriors. They had come. They had fought. They had won. But victory had left them questioning who they truly were. The young soldier beside him finally spoke, voice low and shaky. Do you think they'll ever forgive us? The commander didn't answer immediately. He shook his head slowly. They won't. They can't understand. We didn't come to save them in the way they wanted. We came to survive for them. And sometimes surviving isn't kind. Around them, the rest of the team cleaned their weapons, adjusted their armor, and stared silently at the void. Each carried memories of battle, the screams, the fires, the fallen. Some tried not to think of the first team, the ones who had vanished, leaving signals behind that led them into the heart of chaos. Others thought of the creature they had awakened, the massive being that had once been a guardian and now was gone beneath the scorched earth. Days passed in silence. The crew moved mechanically, eating, sleeping, and maintaining the ship's systems. Communication with Earth was limited. Few words came from orbit, and those that did were cautious, congratulatory, and cold. Earth was proud, but the pride felt distant. Pride did not fill the emptiness that hung over the soldiers like a shadow. One night, as the artificial lights dimmed, the commander walked among them. He stopped beside a soldier staring at a small, holographic image of the glowing alien forest before the destruction. Thinking about home, he asked. The soldier shook his head. Not home, he said quietly. There's nothing like this on Earth. Not forests that glow, not skies that bleed color at night. I can't forget it, the commander nodded. He understood. Earth had trained them for survival, for war, for precision, but it had not prepared them for the weight of victory. The kind of victory that leaves nothing to celebrate, nothing to rejoice in. They had come as warriors. They had fought as executioners, and now they were returning as something else. Ghosts wearing human skin. When the fleet finally reached Earth, the atmosphere greeted them silently. No crowds, no celebrations, no parades. The world had continued without them as if nothing had happened. The news spoke of progress, of politics, of problems far smaller than the wars they had fought among the stars. The soldiers disembarked quietly at a remote base. Their ships were docked, sealed, and the records of their mission classified for decades. They walked on soil that was familiar yet strange after months in alien air. Some knelt and touched the earth as if asking it to remember them. Others stood rigid, letting nothing show. The commander gathered his team one last time. We did what was necessary, he said. We fought to survive, and we fought to keep others alive. Not everyone will understand what we did. Not everyone will forgive it. But this is our world, and this is what we brought back from theirs. There was no applause, no cheers, only silence, but each soldier understood the meaning behind his words. They had answered a call for help, yes, but in doing so, they had become something more than human. Something feared, something remembered, something that would echo in whispers across galaxies. The next weeks were spent in debriefings, medical checks, and silence. No one spoke of emotions openly. Not grief, not fear, not guilt. But in private, the soldiers wrote in journals, talked in whispers, or stared at the stars from empty observation decks. Each thought of the world they had left behind, the creatures they had faced, and the innocence they had protected without their permission. One day, a scientist approached the commander. You realize, she said softly, the stories of your mission will spread. Across the galaxy, if this signal reaches others, you won't just be warriors. You'll be seen as something else. The commander looked at her. His face was tired, older than his years. "They already see us as that," he said. "Even the ones we saved, they fear us. And maybe they should. We didn't go to comfort them. We went to end a threat. That's not heroism." The scientist nodded. "Executioners," she said. The word hung in the air like smoke. He didn't deny it. He couldn't. Over time, the human race returned to its routines. The general population knew nothing of the mission. Earth remained unaware of the battles fought light years away, of the power it had wielded, of the fear it had spread. But among those who had been there, among the few who knew the truth, the memory was vivid and unshakable. The soldiers tried to live normal lives. Some returned to families. Some vanished again, choosing solitude over the misunderstanding of others. None of them spoke publicly. And when the stars were clear and the night was silent, each of them thought of the alien planet, the locals, and the creature they had awakened, and the price of being human in a universe that demanded more than compassion. Years later, the survivors occasionally returned to observation decks, watching the skies. They could still see faint traces of the signals from the worlds they had visited, and though they never went back, they knew that somewhere someone would remember them, not as heroes, not as saviors, but as executioners. The galaxy had learned something about Earth. When the planet answers a call for help, it does not send angels. It sends survivors. It sends warriors shaped by fire, by death, and by the refusal to yield. And those who called for help quickly learned that Earth's answer was precise, unstoppable and unforgettable. At night, when the wind whispered through empty corridors of the base, the commander would walk alone. He would look at the stars and remember the faces of those they saved, and the fear in their eyes. "We came as warriors," he would murmur. "We left as executioners." And somewhere far across the galaxy, the whispers of that truth began to travel. Among the stars, other worlds began to speak in hushed tones of the humans who fought not for glory, not for honor, but for survival. They spoke of the planet that answered cries for help with fire, precision, and steel. They spoke of the warriors who carried the weight of life and death in every step, and on Earth life went on. But among the few who had been there, who had looked into the void and returned, there was no forgetting, no peace. Only the knowledge that when the universe called for help, humanity answered, not with mercy, but with the kind of strength that leaves legends behind. They had come as saviors. They had fought as predators, and they had returned as executioners. The story of their mission would never be fully told. It would never be fully understood, and perhaps that was exactly as it should be. For in the end, Earth had sent its answer, and no one anywhere in the galaxy would ever forget it.